So like that's why it matters whether or not there are chairs, because it bears on whether or not you exist, and if you do, what kind of thing you are.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Said a Case. This is my puppy, Theophilus, the most excellent puppy, and I gotta hold him or he'll bite my cords. Be a good boy. On this episode of the Parker's Pensées podcast, it's like a part 2 of my recent conversation with Joe Schmid. We recently went over our favorite books in philosophy, or the ones that helped us learn philosophy and dragged us in deeper. So if you haven't watched that, go ahead and watch that episode. This is like the part 2 of that, where we're going to be talking about public philosophy. Who counts as a philosopher? Why are the Continentals beating the analytics in public philosophy? And a little bit more. So stay tuned and you'll learn all about public philosophy. If you have not watched that one with Joe before this on our books, do go watch that. Link in the description. You can watch this full one, and then there'll be a card directing you to that one. Theophilus is crazy. Before we jump in, though, thanks everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon. If you have benefited from this podcast, if it's one of your top 10 or top 5 favorites, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. You can join for $3 a month all the way up to $100 a month. If you join at 100, you become virtually part of my family. So that would be huge. Another way to give is down here in the super thanks. You can click a super thanks button and you can just give a one-time gift if you enjoy the podcast and want to help support what I got going on here. So without further ado, let's pull Joe in, and actually we're going to be mid-conversation. So let's cut to that.
Yeah, that's logic, and I think that takes us to the last part of our video.
Oh yeah, man, we made it. We did it. So, folks, that's like, those are books that will help you grow in your philosophical acumen. Will they make you a philosopher? Like, that's kind of a question I want to pose to Joe.
What even is a philosopher? I don't know what a
philosopher.
Yeah,
right, dude. Yeah,
I seriously don't know what a philosopher is. Do you need to have a PhD to be a philosopher?
See, that's what I want. That's what I want to ask you, dude. Like, you publish more than a lot of professional philosophers. If you're not a philosopher, then it's like, then we just need a new term, or that term has lost its meaning. It can't. I don't know, man. I don't
know what it is either.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what is a philosopher? I mean, it can it be like, is having a PhD required? Well, then what about like Plato? Did he have a PhD? No.
Does Swinburne have a PhD?
Okay, so Swinburne's quite old, and he has the degree program that they had way back when for like in his education. So it's not a strict. I don't think it's like a strict PhD as we currently conceive of it.
Right.
I remember reading about this.
Yeah. So like you don't get to call Swinburne a philosopher. Right?
Yeah, that's a reductio. Yeah, I mean, it's really weird. Like, do you have to be publishing? But like, you don't have to be publishing. Someone could have just gotten their PhD, and then maybe they teach philosophy to people at like a community college, and they don't publish or anything. They're still a philosopher. So like, you don't need to publish, but you also don't need a PhD. I mean, it seems as though someone who's like actively in the field, they're actively publishing, they're publishing books and articles in top academic presses. That seems to qualify them as a philosopher, doesn't it? But I don't know. I don't know what a philosopher is.
I mean, I had the answer, man.
Yeah, no, see, I lean towards more inclusivism on this. Like, I tend to think that way more people are philosophers than people think. I mean, because you can distinguish, like, listen, I'm a soccer player. I'm not a professional soccer player, but I'm a soccer player, right? So people can be philosophers without being professional philosophers. I guess, so that's a distinction. In that sense, anyone who's, like, interested in philosophy, who reads it and so on, and who is, like, kind of committed to doing what philosophy is, I guess they would qualify as a philosopher. Maybe they wouldn't ipso facto qualify as a professional philosopher. Yeah. But then what do you need for a professional philosopher? I don't know.
Exactly. Because it's like, well, if a dude read our whole list of philosophy books and then started a YouTube channel and started making bank, like, he's not a professional philosopher. Well, he's making his whole living, and he's making more than 3 philosophers put together at Oxford.
And he could be teaching at the exact same level, and he could even have more knowledge than those sorts of
with a way bigger audience. And way more
bigger audience, way more influence,
and
more
but
money.
I'm like, yeah, but you're not like publishing in journals. Like, you should be doing that. But it's like, what? But Plato didn't publish in journals. Like, okay, well, Plato, that's back. It's like, it's tough, dude.
Yeah, I'm with you. But
Yeah.
I lean towards more the inclusivist. Like more people are philosophers than we think. Like you're
That's
a philosopher,
good.
I'm a philosopher. A lot of the people who are listening right now are probably philosophers.
Interesting.
As for what's a professional philosopher, I don't know. Don't ask me.
That's good. Well, I wanted to ask you about like the state of popular philosophy because I'm swimming in a bunch of different worlds now. Like when it comes to social media and stuff, trying to promote the podcast, and it's fun. Like people get lost. Like the Instagram population is cut off from the Facebook, and like when it comes to philosophers and stuff. But like Instagram philosophy is all continental. It's just all like you follow any of the hashtags and stuff. And I'm like, why are the continentals winning in the public sphere? And maybe you don't see that. But what do you think? Like, what is the state of public philosophy?
Yeah. So some precautionary notes. So I'm just going to be speaking in broad brushstrokes,
Yeah.
and moreover, when we're talking about continental analytic philosophy, again, these are broad brushstrokes. There's overlap in certain places. Things get messy and so on.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to like do these like super duper dichotomous black and white sort of thinking. We're not trying
Yeah.
to do that. But in general, you can see general trends among what we can call analytic philosophy and what we can
Family
call
resemblance.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
right.
exactly. So that's just a precautionary note. I don't want to be too rigid here, but
Sure.
so yeah, what is the state of popular philosophy? So I guess I'd say it's maybe middling. There's some good and some bad there.
Hmm.
I mean, for starters, I still don't think like philosophy as such. I just don't think it's prevalent, and I don't think it's well known. At least, again, a lot of this is based on my personal experience, but
Sure.
when I tell people I study philosophy, I mean, they either think of psychology, they kind of think about that first. And even if they don't think about that, they don't know what it is. They don't know what questions are being asked. They don't know how philosophers investigate them. They don't know about the state of the field at all.
Yeah.
So that's disconcerting.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess some positive side of this with respect to its state, and I know later on we're going to talk about why the Continentals might be seeming to be winning or whatever.
Yeah.
But another thing is like, this is a positive. It does seem to be growing in some sense. I mean, again, I don't have empirical evidence for this. It's just like a personal observation. But I don't know, more YouTube channels are cropping up that they're dedicated to either philosophy of religion or philosophy more generally. More podcasts are cropping up, and more books are being written by more and more presses, by different authors and so on. Popularizers are doing quite well, like Philosophy Tube, for instance. Like these people are growing, and they're at least exposing philosophical kinds of thinking to audiences. So I see a lot of growth in a lot of different areas, which is positive. But I'd still say like the state is middling, if not, I guess, more disconcerting than not, just because so many people just don't even know what philosophy is. So
yeah. Well, so like, do you see a lot of I like some continental stuff. Like if you want to say phenomenology is continental, then I like those folks. I like reading some stuff. Like I said earlier, I want to be well rounded. I want to know all of it. I'm in for all of it because I want to be a philosopher. And if you think the philosopher should know this, then I'm going to know that. And just because I want to do that, I think it's fun. But it's like, hey, I'm studying to be a philosopher. I study philosophy of religion. And I don't say that anymore because it gets so confused on what I study. And that's just a historical accident. It was philosophy of religion because everyone was Christian, and they were all like, "Here's what we're studying." They weren't like comparative religion type stuff. So does God exist? And those questions. Do you see a lot of like when you say you study philosophy? Do people say like Nietzsche and Marx? Do you get that kind of stuff or no?
I mean, usually I get, oh, that's interesting. What are you going to do with that? But that's usually what I get. But like some people, it's interesting. So when I told one person, he asked me, oh, that's interesting. Do you study more so? Well, the person asked me what style, and I was like, interesting. You're asking me about my style. I thought they were asking analytic versus continental, and it turns out they were. I asked like, well, what do you mean by that? In typical philosophical fashion.
What do you mean by defend that?
And they're like, oh, do you like do continental philosophy with like Zizek and so on, or are you more analytic? And this person clearly was more on the continental side. So I don't. Sure. I honestly, I honestly don't quite know. I mean, in my own experience, most people again just don't really.
Yeah.
They have no clue. I mean, as for like whether or not in the popular sphere, you have more of an idea than I do. I mean, I guess in high school, when I was in high school, like when people picked up philosophy things, they were picking up like Aurelius, Nietzsche, things like that. Kierkegaard, like Sartre, all these different sorts of existentialists. So big on continental sort of thing. So like I guess if I had to say which one, I mean, in the popular sphere, I guess I'd say continental.
Yeah, I see a lot of existentialists and weird stuff that's come down from that, and a lot of like antinatalist type stuff. But and then a lot of Stoics. Like the Stoics are
the Stoics are big, yeah.
They have a great PR. Like they got all sorts of popular level books, thinking like a Stoic and all this kind of stuff. And so I get that one too, where it's like, okay, so like, how should we live, kind of stuff. And I just want to be able to answer that. I would love to be able to answer that in like as an analytic and not like being super pedantic, but whatever. I'm in for all of it. But why like Zizek gets so much play?
Yeah.
I mean, bro, you have a great accent of him.
Yeah, it's like pure capitalist ideology.
Why does he get so much play, and why does that like? How come people know about him, but they don't know about like Mike Humer or Timothy Williamson or someone like that?
Yeah, so I guess I can't speak to the socio-historical contingencies that led to Zizek coming to
power.
As opposed to these other people. But I mean, more generally, if we might ask, why does continental philosophy seem to be, I guess, resonating more with people than analytic philosophy in the popular sphere? I mean, I have some hypotheses. I mean, again, I don't know if these are true, but I guess they're proffered explanations. They're proposed explanations. I mean, one of them is like maybe people find continental philosophy more relatable, maybe more interesting, right? I mean, it talks much more about that compared to analytic philosophy. It talks much more about like meaning and purpose and existential significance and like the role of ideology and propaganda in our lives and things like that. So I guess people find that kind of interesting, relatable, and I mean, compare that with what analytic, like a textbook analytic philosophy question, like the special and general composition questions. It's like, what are material objects? Under what conditions do a group of simple things compose a material object? And like, do chairs exist? Like those sorts of questions.
See, I love those though. I'm like, yeah, do chairs? I look at my chair every day and I'm like, are you here or not? Like, what's the deal? Like,
I know.
Then I think about like panpsychism and I'm like, boy, what are you thinking? Like, yeah, dude. But I understand. Exactly. I get what you're saying. Your point's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of those questions are just couched in like, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions that need to be met for a collection of particles P1 through Pn to compose a composite object O, such that O is not and then you get to plural quantification. Like, you get into the weeds so fast. Whereas with the continentals, I don't know. It's just, while those questions, I don't know, at least seem interesting that the analytics were asking, I don't know, they're just much more like lived experience, like meaning, significance, like why am I here, like what is this ideology thing, like people think about, there's this really like continental take on capitalism versus communism that kind of Zizek is into, that people are, I don't know, that's like into people's lives and so on, right? Because it's like the materialist consumerist culture that we're in. So I guess that's one hypothesis, right? That it's just more relatable, more interesting. Another hypothesis is that, I guess it might be more grounded in like lived experience, right? I mean, like, phenomenology and these sorts of questions. People are dealing with the troubles that life throws at them. And that's a lot of what continental is, at least as I've read the existentialists specifically. I mean, they talk about those sorts of questions, like the absurdity of life and like what happens in light of tragedies that come and things like that. I guess another hypothesis is just that it's continental philosophy is more comparatively speaking, it's more poetic and literary, and that seems to be more engaging, I guess, to an audience, right? It's because it's more poetic. It's interesting. It's more like literature. People can read it. That it's not true. You're not opening up and finding like these different quantifiers and they're ranging over certain domains and other sorts of things. So and that bleeds into my next hypothesis, was just that there's a relatively low barrier to entry for continental philosophy compared to analytic philosophy. I guess like just with analytic philosophy, it is just so much like you have this math, right? The math you need to do philosophy. That's analytic philosophy. Right. You need to know about sets and functions and power sets and the distinction between syntax and semantics. You need to know what an extension is and what a predicate is, and like all these different sorts of things, man.
Yeah.
And quantifiers and propositions. Like, there's a relatively high barrier to entry for that. You need to read like that's why we were talking about this. Like, to get into analytic philosophy, you have to read the intros to analytic philosophy. You have to have these bases that then you can build on. You can't just go into, for instance, Pierre Boom and McKenna's book. So yeah, I guess there's somewhat of a high barrier to entry to that, and it takes a lot. Like, you really need to be dedicated to it. Whereas with a Continental Philosophy book, you could just pick up like Kierkegaard and start like reading, you know.
You're gonna trigger some people. I have some hardcore Kierkegaard fans. Kierkegaard, they'll even say.
I know, Kierkegaard. Some people pronounce it like that.
That's right.
I didn't want to sound pretentious, so that's why I did say
That's good. This is Parker's Pensées. We say Kierkegaard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we also like Kierkegaard. Like, no,
that's right.
We say Sartre.
Yeah.
And Zizek.
Oh man, that's rough.
But yeah, so I guess those are some of my hypotheses. I mean, it's more relatable. Maybe it's more interesting. It's more grounded in lived experience. It's more poetic. It's more literary. And so thereby it's more engaging. And also there's a relatively low barrier to entry compared to analytic philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good, man.
I mean, what do you think about that?
So I don't want to alienate too many people by I'm losing it here by bringing up Roger Scruton again. But Roger Scruton did this kind of cool dance between the two where he would say certain stuff like the Continentals have good questions. Like, being actually is a good question, but they don't answer it well at all. And I just like that. I like that he's like dipping, and then he'll be like, the content or the analytics focus so in on one thing that it doesn't help anyone. I like the rigor, right? And he was trained, I guess he was trained both, but I like that kind of style. I want to be able to do both. I think you're probably right that it's like, I think it kind of fits the ideal of a philosopher that you think, just like the folk understanding. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but the folk understanding of a philosopher is like a guy with a beard who gives you like gnomic statements all the time and helps you with your life, right?
Yeah.
And I still like that idea. I just don't know that that is philosophy. I don't know if that ever has been philosophy, as I'm thinking through as I talk with like Timothy Williamson and think about like what was Plato really doing, those kind of things. And like, he kind of was a math snob, and like, you kind of had to know some geometry to even enter his school. Like, there were some times where the crowd would get all mad at him because he wasn't speaking down to them enough. So like, that's always been there, but there's also always been the sages out in the desert, and you go talk to them, and they do have genuine proverbs, but like the proverbs are always like, either you get it or you don't, you know, and they're like riddles and sayings and maxims. And I like those, but they never like, the wise man doesn't go like, here's the 10 premises to help you understand this. Like, you're supposed to go and do that, or, you know, or you just see it by like rational intuition. So yeah, that stuff's way more popular, man. It's just like, it's more digestible.
Yeah. Digestible, pithy.
Yeah. And in some sense, like, shoot, someone said this on Facebook the other day. Someone's daughter said this, and it's really, really good. I wish I remembered who said it, but their daughter was like talking about philosophy, and like, it's kind of like explaining the joke, like analytic philosophy. She's like, doesn't it make you sad? Like, kind of like, it's kind of like explaining the joke. Like, you're just going in deep, like, so maybe people feel that way, that it's just like, it's too much.
That reminds me, I mean, another hypothesis that we've sort of been mentioning is like the questions, I guess, that they ask, or I don't know. Just like the absurdity of life, purpose, these sorts of questions that I guess analytics just aren't as interested in. I mean, of course, you're going to find analytic philosophers writing on these sorts of things, but again, you're much more likely to find people talking about whether or not there are chairs.
I just like that. I really do like that one.
So do I. I mean, people think that it's irrelevant, but like, so I want to get Trent Merrick's on my channel at some point soon to talk about composite objects and so on.
Yeah.
And I want to start because I can already like hear people saying like, this is so pointless, but like, this touches on whether like what kind of thing you are. Are you like an immaterial soul? Because like suppose mereological nihilism is true, then there aren't any brains. There aren't any composite material objects. Humans don't really exist. It's just particles arranged human-wise.
Yeah.
So
or like unrestricted composition, and you're like, what do you think?
are there like billions of thinking things here? Because like my brain seems to be
like my
sufficient.
mustache and your glasses are a thing. Like But then you like bring up someone who's really smart who thinks that, and then you give them an argument like that's I love that kind of stuff, dude.
And I mean, like, it just does bear on what kind of thing we are. Like, if mereological nihilism is true, it's very plausible. It's a very plausible entailment from that you get substance dualism, because you either don't exist, which seems just whoa, like that's a significant result, or if you do exist, you're either a simple particle, which is what you're a simple particle, like. And then you get into conservation of mass energy. It's like you've existed for maybe billions of years. Like what? And then if that's not the case, well, then you'd have to be an immaterial soul. So like that's why it matters whether or not there are chairs, because it bears on whether or not you exist, and if you do, what kind of thing you are. So like I just
and then so much falls out from that. You want to talk about meaning of life type stuff. You want to talk, like it's just downstream. It's just downstream. That's okay. Like
so. Yeah, downstream, that's another thing. It's like you have to get settled on these other, lots of these other questions first. So that's another thing. I mean, I guess...
It's hard to settle those things, right? Like, get settled on it, and it's like, well, good luck. Like, it's
exactly.
Really it's Kenny Boyce, his daughter, I think. I think Kenny Boyce, hopefully he doesn't mind me saying that his daughter said that, but she's the one who said, isn't it like explaining the joke? Yeah, I think.
Well, I mean, the final question that you had on here, which I thought was really interesting, which was how to push back, to push back against the influence. I mean, we're just being a little bit tongue-in-cheek when we say push back. I mean,
you're explaining the joke, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I mean, I guess I had a few hypotheses for how we could push back. I guess they're not really hypotheses, but methods. So one of them is, of course, to lower the barriers to entry in analytic philosophy, or at least take the steps to help people enter into it. So that's kind of what our channels are partly meant to do. And we just need to lower the barriers to entry, get more people to see, like, okay, you don't need to know all the details of set theory and so on to start getting into these questions. There are more digestible books, like I said, this one, Applied Ethics, right? This is so comprehensible, but you're not going to find set theory or anything like that in here. And so lowering the barriers to entry for people, that's going to be one way. A second way is to evangelize, to spread the good news of analytic philosophy, right? So we can display, exhibit, and emphasize the virtues of analytic philosophy. So I guess just emphasize to people what's good about it. Clarity, it's concision, it's precision, the fact that it's so structured, right? You have explicit signposting, you have here's an objection, I'm going to consider this objection, here's my reply to the objection. It's really nicely structured. You've got the rigor there and the care and caution with respect to the use of language. So that's helping to eliminate sorts of ambiguities. You've got the incorporation of formal methods like formal epistemology, credences, Bayes' theorem, sets, the math you need to do philosophy. This is the incorporation of formal methods, as well as, so that's another virtue of analytic philosophy, as well as the fact that it can be and often is interdisciplinary, especially with science. So it's oftentimes in touch with science. You will often find, especially in philosophy of science and philosophy of physics, and in cases philosophy of religion, you will see a lot of philosophy of free will, lots of other places, philosophy of mind. You'll see drawing on the resources of contemporary findings in science. So you'll see that a lot. Those are all really good aspects of analytic philosophy, and if we display those, if we exhibit those, if we emphasize those to people, they can start to see the value of it more. So that's the second thing that I want to say. And then the final thing, before I turn it over to you to either offer thoughts of your own or comment on what I said, is just I guess to show people that they don't have to choose between continental philosophy and analytic philosophy, right? I mean, they can have a kind of synthesis here. I guess they can investigate the questions primarily asked by continentals, though of course not exclusively asked by them, but they can still investigate the questions that continentals primarily ask, having to do with absurdity and meaning and significance and purpose and existence and things like that. But they can investigate those questions using the tools and concepts of analytic philosophy. So it's almost like you can have, for these people, you can have the content being continental type stuff, but the method that you use could be, let's say, analytic, and then the implementation of that method can be a kind of mixture. So you can mix in some literary aspects. It doesn't just have to, like, if you're writing things, if you're trying to read things, it doesn't just have to be, I have 3 objections. Here's my first objection. It's that premise 1 is false. Here's my response to that objection. My response to that objection, like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like you can interweave literary and poetic elements into it. So it's like a mixture. I guess I'm just trying to say, like, you can synthesize these things.
Yeah. That last point is huge. I think that's really hard to do, but I know that we can do it. Like, there's some people can, like, humor is already doing it, so I think he does a good job of that. I don't know if he's doing a ton of literary stuff, but
at least make it more engaging. Like, that's the sort of thing. Like,
yeah. Well, yeah, dude. Okay, so my thing, I think my big takeaway or whatever, my like suggestion is that I've heard, I talk with tons of philosophers now, as you do, and a lot of them are interested in a public-facing philosophy. I don't know how they all learn the same phrase, but they all say a public-facing philosophy. And I'm like, cool, that's great. What does the public want? What does the public think about philosophy? When the public thinks about a philosophical question, what do they have in mind? And usually it's simulation hypothesis. It's those kinds of things. It's like, what is an NFT? Like these kind of things. And I try to deal with them on my channel, and I'm trying to start that more, where I'm trying to ask these like heavy duty philosophers, like, what if we are living in a computer simulation? How would that affect things? Or like, can you help me explain content externalism, and what do you make of that? Let's use the simulation hypothesis in order to do that, because I know I talk with college students every day. They want to talk about that kind of stuff. They think it's interesting. They think that's what philosophy is. So cool, just grab that. And I think that's kind of how we can show like the actual rigor still. I don't like dumbing and watering things down. Yeah, you're gonna have to. You can't just only write in existential quantifiers. Like, you have to do more. Like, you can't.
is this a challenge?
It's more than predicate logic. Yeah, right. Yeah. But you can do it by picking the right topics, I think, right? Or by picking the right topics to that genuine. There is a genuine connection between your expertise and that topic, right? Like, you can do that. You can find those. It's all connected anyway. So that's my suggestion, that people find out what the public thinks philosophy is, and the philosophical questions they have in mind, and then either work on those explicitly or tie those to yours, and then drag them in. I don't want to dumb it all down. I think that they need to drag people into philosophy more.
Yeah. I was gonna say someone who does this really well, and I guess we could probably end on something like this point, but someone who does this really well is David Chalmers, right? His recent book, Reality Plus.
Big time, yeah.
Like, you could see that it's like analytic philosophy, but he's breaking it down for a popular audience, and he's covering these super interesting questions about virtual worlds, and are they real, and in what senses of real. So he disambiguates the senses of real, and these other sorts of things. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. This almost like a synthesis. It's like, it's the questions that people are interested in, firstly, and it's like the method. You could see, for those who are kind of have the glasses on, they could see that it's analytic philosophy, really, but it's done at a really approachable level, and just a way that doesn't take away from the rigor, but preserves it, while also allowing people to kind of enter into it and to think clearly about it, right? Because he's disambiguating the senses of real, and like he's going over these arguments, and it's all super interesting because it's on these questions, like simulation hypothesis, other sorts of things.
And he does it with like, this is just cherry on top, but he has really good visuals in there too. Like, someone did it well. It's like, oh yeah, the manifest image and the scientific image, like, it's just, and it's clever and it's cool. Like, yes, that's good. That packaging helps too. Like, if you're trying to reach the public, that stuff helps. Yeah. Dude, that's huge. We've been going a while here, dude. Thanks so much for all your time. And I don't know. I'll have to look to see if you beat Taylor or not. But dude, thanks so much for all your time.
Yeah, I'm coming close. True. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me come on. So
so really it's Majesty of Reason, folks. Like, I'm pretty sure if you're here, you already know Joe. But if not, go check out his channel. Link will be in the description. And man, let's make philosophy great again.
Absolutely.
Awesome. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.